And it was really cool to go to Bombay and see that, like, it was, people had been sort of caring about me, following my life, like, and like, you know, they loved me even though I didn't really know that much about them and things like that. And they've been following our progress for so many years. So that's all I have. So if you guys have any questions, or if you have any sort of like thoughts on maybe those three things I've been thinking about, the globalization, identity, and, you know, similarities between people. Yeah.
Your identity now, you're American. So I want to ask about your mother, your uncle. What is their identity?
My mother and my uncle, the ones who are half.
At the second generation of Indian.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I wish I could have had my mother come out and give this talk also. She would love to meet all of you guys. But yes, I'll Skype her. Yeah, so she also, like, this is something I'm sure she thought a lot about, because growing up, like, there were not many Indians in Los Angeles at that time, and so I think it was sort of an important part of her identity that her mother was Indian in Los Angeles, and she was half Indian, and things like that. And that's something I need to have more conversations with her about, because it would be really interesting. I will say this. So when we were growing up, my mother used to love to walk around with my little brother and us siblings. And anytime we would see someone who was from India or whatever, she used to tell them, "Oh, look at my children. They're Indian." And it would be sort of funny because obviously we didn't look very Indian. But I do think that was an important part of her identity as well. Yeah.
You said that first your grandfather and grandmother, they were dating, you know, your families did not know the family of your grandmother. Then when they took the decision to marry, how did the family of your grandmother, how they reacted?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think they took some convincing, to understand. And I think part of that was they were not comfortable with their daughter going halfway around the world to marry someone who they'd only met a couple of times. And they really didn't know that much about American culture. The only things they'd heard about American culture, my grandmother tells me, is that there's a high divorce rate in America. So naturally, my grandmother's parents were very worried. They were very worried. They said, "We can't send you all the way to America because what if you get divorced? What will happen then? How will you come back home?" So they were, they needed, actually, so my grandfather had to have, he had, the priest in his church wrote a letter saying to my grandmother's family in Bombay. And they said, "Dear Sarmento and Bertha, just want to let you know, Vincent Thorpe and his family, they're a great family. They're very trustworthy, I'm a priest, so I know these things." And he sent that letter, and apparently that helped. So they had some outside stamp of approval. Yeah.
So I'm interested in the primary sources here. Do you have the letters that your grandfather and grandmother exchanged? That would be juicy.
We actually, my grandparents have those letters. Yeah, so that is something I'll have to ask them about. But
especially the proposal letter, right?
Right. That may have happened over the phone, actually. I think that might have been a really long... that's an important question, right? You might pay the extra money and get a phone call. But, yeah.
Do you think it would be any different if there had been, technology? It was very quick.
Yeah, right.
Do you think, maybe that enhanced their relationship because, maybe you talk about letters being much more personal.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Yeah, that's a really interesting way to sort of think about. There's clearly a lot of downsides to taking the time to write letters, but maybe there's also something nice about it, more intimate and more. Yeah, I wonder. It's hard to say. And it's also this story is so rooted in that time period because today I mean, in America, it's not that uncommon to see people of different, countries marrying in different, and I think they were really one of the first ones that we know of in their generation. So it would be interesting to sort of picture how this would play out today. But there'd be a lot more Skype phone calls. Maybe some G chats or Facebook messages.
Has your grandmother ever talked about, whether she missed India or what challenges she faced in adapting to her new life?
Yeah, she said, so she really missed Indian cooking. But they didn't have a lot of the spices that they have in India. So she sort of did her best and she recreated one of her favorite dishes, pulao. And it's a really interesting dish. The way my grandmother makes it, it's my favorite dish I've ever had. Like anytime we have big, like holidays like Thanksgiving or Christmas, my grandmother has to make pulao because it's such a part of our family. But what's interesting about it is it's totally unlike the pulao that we have, that I've tried in the subcontinent and in India and places like that. And so I think food was something that she really missed and sort of had to do her best and create this like interesting fusion of food that like resembled what she knew. But yeah, I do think she did miss India. I mean, it would have been a huge change.
How did she feel knowing that she'd be the highlighter topic here, the headliner topic?
I casually mentioned it to them. I did not explain fully. I told them I was giving a talk about my family. They'll probably find out that I think their story is such a beautiful story, and I've probably told half of you guys here in this room the story at some point, so I thought I might as well share it with the rest of you. But yeah, it's been really interesting. Actually, one thing, so I have been sort of talking a lot with my grandparents about their story and about sort of their history, and it's amazing how much you can learn if you ask the right questions. And this is something I would urge all of you guys, like if you have older family members, like just sit down with them one day, like maybe with a microphone or maybe just with a notebook, and just have them tell you their stories, because it's really cool. It's a really cool project. So, questions?
I have another.
Yeah. Okay.
You told me this really cute story about how you and your two sisters all took the same Politics of India class.
Oh, yes.
Which I also did, but at different times. So at that time, I just thought, you thought that the course was interesting and took it, but now there's this other dimension. So did this family tie to India play a role?
Absolutely, yeah. So the story she's referring to, so my sisters and I are also very close. We all went to the same university, and we overlapped for 1 year. All three of us were there at the same time for 1 year. And we all took a class together, right? All three of us. And we would sit next to each other every class. And the professor actually knew us by name because it was somewhat a small class. And one class she just says, the Newhouse sisters sitting there in the third row. And we're like, oh no. But the class was Politics of India. Because that is one thing, we've grown up our whole lives, like having relatives from India coming and visiting, having my grandfather's very interested in India. Aside from having married a Bombay bride, like he went to India to study the politics there for a year. He's always been interested in that, and he has a lot of really cool thoughts about sort of India's democracy and things like that. And then, so he's interested from an academic point. So we've all grown up with this like interest in India that goes sort of beyond like just personal interest and also academic. My sister actually wrote her senior thesis on India. My other sister has lived in India she's currently there right now, living. And so, yeah, it's definitely something we're interested in. Any other? Yeah.
I think you should also tell them the story about the picture you saw in your grandfather's house, or your uncle's house.
Which?
The one with the political leader in the area. Because it shows like how small the world is.
Oh, okay. So my uncle who I stayed with in Goa, my Tio Boshko, he was a diplomat So he actually has an interesting story as well. It's sort of globalized. Because he was born in Goa, Goa was a Portuguese colony up until like very, very late. So people born in Goa had Portuguese, like before 1960 or something, have Portuguese citizenship. So he was born in Goa. He has Portuguese citizenship. He went to use that citizenship to get a job in England with the BBC, where he worked for a long time. And then he retired and became an EU diplomat to Bangladesh, actually. So when we came to visit him in Goa, we walked into his house and I say, Tio Boshko, is this a picture of you with Sheikh Hasina? He says, oh yes, I know Sheikh Hasina. Oh my God. And so he has some really great stories as well. But so currently he lives half his year, he lives the winter months in Goa and the summer months in Lisbon, Portugal. So he has an interesting story as well. So Goa to, London to back to Goa / Portugal. So yeah, very global.
But maybe you have to clarify that for me because I was confused. But your family actually says we have no Portuguese blood. We are going.
Right.
You have to explain that to me because I was conflating the two and thinking,
So Goa is like it's very much its own culture and things like that. Like when I would talk to my uncle, he would say, "We're not Portuguese, and we're like a very specific part of India." So it's its own thing, and we are going, and they speak Portuguese, but that doesn't mean that they are Portuguese or have Portuguese blood necessarily. Kind of like how there's parts of India maybe where people speak like English maybe as their first language and other languages as their second or third, but you wouldn't say like that person is British or English. So yeah, Goa is a really fascinating place. I think you all should go and learn more about it. So.